Hey, this is the Summit. I'm Brad. Today is Saturday, and that means today we'll be going over the Gospel readings, which will be covered in this Sunday, which will be September 18th, 2022. So this was a this was an interesting week to start recording this podcast because this Gospel is a difficult one. I'll even preface by saying I don't know if I fully understand it. I have learned a lot about it, but I think there's still some unanswered questions. And when I began my investigation or research, whatever you want to call it, um, I was the search results I was met with was this is a very difficult reading. Lots of mystery around this reading. Lots of people confused by this reading. And it is a tough one, especially on its face. Before I researched it, I didn't quite know what it was about. So the reading is from the Gospel of Luke, St. Luke. It's chapter 16, verse 1 through 13. And I'm going to jump into the reading pretty quickly, but before I do want to set up kind of the setting. So in Luke, in the later chapters of Luke, Jesus is traveling, is on a long journey southward to Jerusalem, where he will eventually, be crucified during the Holy Week. And on as he travels and goes south, he is. I think when he gets closer to Jerusalem, he starts to have banquets. He starts to go to dinners, and I believe he kind of trades off holding banquets, his disciples holding banquets with the poor, and then alternatively he goes to banquets of the rich, and he tends to call out the rich at these banquets. So in one of the previous chapters before chapter 16, which is the reading this week, Jesus had gone to a banquet at the head of the Pharisees, and there was numerous parables that he gave, which really kind of accused the Pharisees of wrongdoing indirectly, and as far as I know, indirectly. Maybe he also did it directly, but this rubbed the Pharisees the wrong way, and they started to become angry, as we all know. And then in chapter 15, the chapter right before the gospel reading for this weekend, Jesus is holding, I don't know if it's a banquet, but he is speaking to people. And so in Luke 15, it says, "Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him," to Jesus. "And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, 'This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" So I wanted to paint the picture on who the crowd is that Jesus is speaking to. He speaks to many people, but one of the people, or one of the groups in the crowd, are tax collectors, and I would even associate this with wealth and people who maybe adore money and might have forgotten the poor because of their love for money. I'm reading into things a little bit, but I'm kind of setting up the reading for Luke, which covers a business manager. So again, Jesus is starting to speak to tax collectors, or at least tax collectors and sinners are coming out because they want to hear what Jesus is saying. Jesus is spreading the good news, and they want to hear this. This is bugging the Pharisees. So with that, Jesus says, he's continuing to talk, and then it goes into the reading, which is, we'll go with it right now. Jesus says to his disciples, "A rich man had a steward who was reported to him for squandering his property. He summoned him and said, 'What is this I hear about you? Prepare a full account of your stewardship, because you can no longer be my steward.' The steward said to himself, 'What shall I do, now that my master is taking the position of steward away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do. I know what I shall do so that, when I am removed from my stewardship, they may welcome me into their homes.' He called in his master's debtors one by one. To the first he said, 'How much do you owe my master?' He replied, 100 measures of olive oil.' He said to him, "Here's your promissory note. Sit down and quickly write one for 50. Then to another the steward said, And you, how much do you owe? He replied, 100 cores of wheat. The steward said to him, Here is your promissory note. Write one for 80. And the master commended the dishonest steward for acting prudently. For the children of this world are more prudent in dealing with their own generation than are the children of the light. I tell you, make friends for yourselves with dishonest wealth, so that when it fails, you will be welcome into eternal dwellings. The person who is trustworthy in very small matters is also trustworthy in great ones. And the person who is dishonest in very small matters is also dishonest in great ones. If therefore you are not trustworthy with dishonest wealth, who will trust you with true wealth? If you are not trustworthy with what belongs to another, who will give you what is yours? No servant can serve two masters. He will either hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon. Okay, so that's the reading. I'm going to break some of this down. Again, it is a confusing reading. That's what I hear from everybody. It's confusing to me still. I don't fully understand it, but I do understand it more than I did before studying it. So let's break it down a bit. So at the beginning, it's really focused on the dishonest steward who has squandered property, and someone's told the master, and the master goes to the steward and goes, I've heard that you've screwed up my property, or you've squandered my property. He says, prepare a full account of your stewardship. So show me the books, because you can no longer be my steward. So that's, the master comes to the steward, calls him out, says, essentially, you're fired, and give me all your books, probably because he has to still run the business, even though he's firing the steward. The steward then says, after he's like, uh-oh, I got fired and I need to do something in reaction, the steward says, what shall I do now that the master is taking the position of steward away from me? I am not strong enough to dig. I am ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do. And then he starts to call in the debtors, and he says, how much do you owe? And they tell him, and then he says, quickly, pay a little bit, pay off your debts, but you'll pay off a little bit less than what you owe, and that'll be good for you because you'll save some money. And it'll be good for me because you'll remember that I did this and you owe me a favor. I'm going to break that down. Actually, let me break that down right now. So what do I mean by break that down? Let me say that I'm not fully sure what this is. So there's some specifics about this event that after studying, I'm hearing some different things. So let me just tell you what I found out. And then furthermore, I really have to say, the master, after all of this, goes, hey, that was pretty smart of you. Good job. Or at least he says, that was smart. You did something smart, and commends him. And that's kind of that. Definitely that's the icing on the confusing cake for this reading. It seems when I do the studying, this is what confuses people the most. Even I spoke to my father earlier today, told him that I was creating this podcast, and the very first thing he said was, "Can you tell me what the gospel means this week?" So he like I think many people, and myself also went, what's going on here? How is the gospel telling? Is praising dishonesty, and that doesn't feel right. That's not in line with Jesus. So I think our gut is telling us something, and is going, what you see here is not what is really is. There's more going on. So a couple things. One, I watched a podcast. Oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name now. I'm going to link to it in the show notes. But it is a man who covered this in like the beginning of his podcast. He was like, I'm been waiting to cover this because I know how confusing it is. So I was like, oh good, I feel like this guy knows what he's talking about, or at least has something to share with me. One thing that he mentioned is it's important to know the culture at the time that the reading was written. And
furthermore, and kind of inversely, is you shouldn't take your culture, what we, at least for you and me right now, take our culture and place it onto the Bible, because things were different then. Now, he goes to talk about the following, which I can't legitimately confirm nor deny, or disprove. But again, as I mentioned before, I only want to say things with certainty when I'm certain. So this is something I saw. Again, I'll link to the show. If it's true, it makes sense, and it is kind of eye-opening. So here, let me get to it. So the setup is, hey, the steward cheats the master out of some money and does a favor, to the debtors, and that doesn't seem right because the master's getting cheated out of money. What this person says is the culture at the time, tax collectors, and again, remember Jesus speaking to tax collectors. I don't know if that gives it any validity, but it just kind of like connected a dot in my mind. So tax collectors would go collect people's money, right? And this guy has, deals with debtors and collects money. And the way that a tax collector gets paid back then is not getting paid by the master once he gives him the money that was owed. He has to charge more than is owed to the master. And whatever's over that he collects to the master, he gets to keep, because he will just pay the master what he is owed and keep the rest. So in this reading, what the person, I wish I knew his name, I really apologize, and I will link to his show, mentioned was that this the man's talking to the debtors, and he is reducing their debts to be in line with what is owed to the master, and the steward is giving up what he was going to overcharge them. And so then the master is getting everything he needs, the debtor is getting a discount, and the steward is getting a favor, or is in good favor with these debtors because he did them a favor. He did them a solid, however you want to put it. And again, I can't confirm that. I don't have any backing for that, but if that were true, I can understand how that would work. So I almost, like, in my mind, hope that that's what it is, because then it makes things make more sense, but that's not how things work. So let me tell an alternative explanation that I heard, and this was it was from a bishop, and I wish I can remember his name as well. I'll link to him in the show notes. I should be better at this. I'll get better at this. But what he said is, the master does get cheated out of money, and but what is still the same is the debtor gets to pay less money, so they're happy. The steward gets a favor, so he's happy, and the master kind of goes, I see what you did there, good job. I mean, you got me, but like, that was pretty smart. Which doesn't at least sit right with me, but it is what the reading says, so I can't strongly argue against that. But it starts to make a little more sense as we go on, and I'm gonna get to that right now. So after the master commends the steward, it says the master commended the dishonest steward for acting prudently, and that's the end of the parable in a sense, or that's the last. That is the end of the parable, and then it goes into Jesus speaking, just from quote Jesus, not Jesus talking in the parable, but saying, for the children of this world, and the children of this world are the people that don't believe in God. For the children of this world are more prudent in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light, and the children of light are the believers. So Jesus is saying the non-believers are more prudent with their own generation than are the children of light. And how this was broken down in the explanation of the person who said that the master doesn't get cheated and the steward is just reducing his debt. He mentions that this is Jesus pointing out that the non-believers, to them money is the most important thing, and it's so important to these non-believers that they'll do anything to keep their money safe and to earn more money. They'll pinch the pennies. They'll do things like the steward did to maximize, to reduce debt or do favors. They'll we saw in previous chapter, and I think in Amos they'll do false weights on scales. They'll do anything they can to increase their money and keep their money safe, and they're good at it. And Jesus then says, they're more prudent dealing with this than the children of light. So I think what he's saying, and this is how it's explained, is, these guys are so good with their money, that's their priority, and they do everything they can for that priority. And you guys, children of light, your priority is God. That's what you're saying. But you're not as prudent with God. You're not doing everything you can to get in, to earn the riches of heaven. And maybe take a note from how shrewd, I think they say, or maybe it's prudent. I don't want to misquote the Bible. Prudent, that be more prudent about your riches, just like the non-believers are with their money. Now, I think it's important to point out, I think this is safe to say, that in the parable, there's really no good person. Jesus is not giving a parable, as an instruction on how you should act. He's not saying, act like the steward, act like the master, act like the debtors. None of those people are people that we should be acting like. That's how I take it. He's just pointing out how good the people who love money are with their money, and how they really do anything they can because that's their priority. And again, it goes back to the idea that I had, that God's really saying, children of the light, you believers should be as prudent with God in your heavenly riches as the non-believers are with their money. And so then finally, this really kind of ties it together, I guess, or gives it a little more validity. At the end, Jesus says, no servant can serve two masters. He will either hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon. And what is mammon? Mammon is material things. That was how it explained to me. I think that's a direct definition of that word. Maybe it's symbolic, and the explanations that I read were extrapolating from that symbolism, that in this case it means material, but I do think mammon means material. So you cannot serve God and things. And this reading covers that with money. Even the first reading in Amos covers how people are, the wealthy class are serving themselves with wealth rather than God. So this kind of ties those two things together. Okay, so that's what I learned about the gospel reading. Again, I don't think I've answered every question, that's for sure. I've maybe provided a little bit more information. It's something I'll have to study in the days on Monday and Tuesday, when I will kind of surface the reflections of the thing at least comes to mind, of the religious leaders, priests and deacons and reverends and the heads of Christian churches for Sunday Mass or Sunday's church service, talking about these readings. I'll surface that up, and maybe some more of those questions that I have and we have will be answered. But I think it's always a journey as you get ready for church. As we go up the summit, we will again go up the summit, hopefully a couple years from now, and we'll reread these readings, because that's how the cycle works, and hopefully we'll be even more prepared then, and be able to pick up where we left off and learn more. But this was a tough reading. I often admit, I tried to explain it to my dad when he asked, and just saying it out loud, I realized how incomplete my understanding is. So I think I'm just I'm just at least hoping I move the needle in the right direction, meaning that we're all learning a little bit more about it. I think it's nice to know the context of who Jesus is speaking to: tax collectors, sinners. Tax collector seems very directly connected to the steward who is collecting debts. So all this stuff, again, we're forming our base of an understanding for this, and hopefully after this Sunday, you'll have stuff to share with me. I mean, I say you, nobody's watching this show, but this is how it's supposed to work when it does work that way. So I'll cut it there because I'm talking for a while, and God bless. Pax.